So to take us further into this discussion, we want to understand what I call the Captain Traoré phenomenon. Why is he so popular, not just in his country, but across the continent? And how far is his influence getting to? And in terms of geopolitics, what does his posture mean for the Sahel region? Professor Kwesi Enin is the head of the Office for International Cooperation of KAIPTEC, and we've spoken to him on this program many times. He's graciously agreed to speak to us to share some insights. Prof, thanks for joining us. Good evening.
Good evening, Bernard. It's always a great pleasure.
Is it fair for me to describe the Burkinabe leader in terms of the Traoré phenomenon? Because I look at social media, I see people commenting on his posts, I see people defending him, and in fact, my next guest after you is organizing a demonstration next week in solidarity with the Burkinabe leader. Is it fair to describe what is going on there as a phenomenon?
Well, I've described what is going on in Burkina Faso, I think, to the BBC last week, as a conflation of two great epochs in African history. The first epoch was the optimism generated by Africa's leaders who won independence for us, and the optimism and the hope that arose on this continent that we've got a new identity, that we can do something for ourselves. The second epoch was the Rawlings Sankara period, where these two young, dynamic leaders, against tremendous political and geopolitical odds, said, we want to do something for our people. We want to change the narrative. Thomas Sankara went ahead and changed the name Upper Volta to Burkina Faso. You know, I think land of the brave or dignified or something of that sort. Traoré captures the optimism of the 1950s and early 1960s, in which our leaders said, look, we can do something for ourselves and create a new identity. He's combined that with the savviness of a modern contemporary leader of the Sankarist Rawlings mode. Good speaker who is trying to transform his economy, his politics, the social identity of his people by simple interventions that are transforming lives. And the whole of the continent is saying, hang on, this is the kind of person that we need. This is not about highfalutin political theory. This is about practical, hands-on transformation of lives through agriculture, through mining, through health, and just the raw engagement with people that says, look at me, as your leader, I'm going to lead an exemplary life. And hopefully during the conversation, I can share with you some of the specific hands-on interventions that are beginning to annoy people. That for the African commander to say that he's against Traoré because he's using the gold resources of Burkinabe for his people, just demonstrates to you the extent of the hatred against this young man who has decided to do what every other decent leader does for his people, transforming their lives. So probably we need a much more stronger, evocative word that describes what Traoré is doing.
So in a sense...
Please tell the other guest that I may not be able to join him physically, but I'll certainly be with him in spirit during the demonstration.
So clearly you understand what he's trying to do and you understand the euphoria around his leadership. But on the 2 points you made, it appears then that part of what is happening is also the aspirations of West Africans, because his rise to power has coincided with both that of Mali's Goita and Niger as well. So it's even though it's not just Burkina specific, it could also be something happening within the Sahel region, that the young people under French colonial rule who are now independent want something more. So it's not just about the man, it's also about the time.
It's about the timing, it's about the positioning, it's about the agency, and it is about the capacity of Traoré, together with Goita and the leader in Niger, to capture the dreams and aspirations first of their people, to change the narrative around the fight against violent extremists and terrorists, and to say we want to be masters of our own countries. And therefore, France, thank you very much. You foisted your language, your culture, and the way that your form of governance, it hasn't helped us. We are willing and prepared to do something else. So in Burkina Faso and in Mali and in Niger, natural resources are being taken over by the government and being used for the benefit of their own people. So in Niger, whilst a kilo of uranium was being sold for $2, the new leadership says, look, I'm not going to charge you less than $200. Because whilst we produce the uranium and your company in France, Areva, takes this uranium and powers France with it, my people are sleeping in darkness. Darkness. It's got to end. A survey undertaken just last week in Niger says 80% of the people like what the government is doing. In Mali, people's daily conversations are not about the fight against terror. It's about food security. It's about health. It's about jobs. It's about ensuring that the quality of education transforms people's lives. In Burkina Faso, the gold mines have been nationalized. We are seeing roads being built, tractors being given to farmers, but even more importantly, food security being improved so that in regions where children were starving and couldn't concentrate on their education and were being destroyed by kwashiorkor, now they can live. Is there still a problem with the terrorist violence? Oh, there certainly is. There certainly is, but Bernard, it raises fundamental questions about how the narrative is being created by the West and in the West. Let me just give me 2 minutes to try to explain. Everybody is telling us that, oh, Traoré is very popular. It is AI generated. Let's, for the sake of the argument, agree that they are AI generated propaganda. Is it different from what the CIA did? Is it different from what the French external agency did? Probably most of your listeners may not know what was called the French Legion and the human rights atrocities that they caused on this continent. Okay, so the only problem of Traoré, Goita, and the Nigerian leaders is that they are using their resources for their people. So when I talk about two epochs in Africa's history that have conflicted to give Traoré the nationalist, the Pan-Africanist stance that he's enjoying, is because Nkrumah, Kawunda, and all those earlier leaders, Azikiwe, Awolowo, have all become chimeras of what could have been. Sankara and Rawlings have also become something that people think when they read and listen to their speech, think, wow, did we ever have these people? Okay, so Traoré suddenly encapsulates all these epochs and driving Burkina Faso together with Mali and Niger to raise critical questions and to bring a different and a new understanding to what development and security means. Let's ask ourselves the second point. All these Western countries who are making noise about terrorism, the spread of violent extremism, they've all been in these three countries for decades. They couldn't bring this issue under control. Overnight, when these guys took over, the terrorists have become much more powerful, better equipment, more mobile, great intelligence access. And where is it coming from? How can this mixed group of people suddenly become so effective? And it raises questions about the quality, the timing, and the usefulness of the security force assistance that our so-called partners gave to these three countries. In Niger, billions of dollars were spent over a 9-year period. Where did the money go? Where did the equipment go? How useful were they? How practical were they? So this is a contestation not only about power and our creation of a new identity for ourselves, led by Traoré, it's also a contestation about how the information and the knowledge that we get is packaged and presented to us. Once more, we are not expected to generate this information. But unfortunately, thanks to social media and smartphones, the information is getting out there. People are critiquing it, people are discussing it. But we shouldn't take it for granted that this is just some fluke that will just go away. I think they've touched a nerve, and that nerve is beginning to bring some changes, even in La Côte d'Ivoire, even in Senegal, even in Central African Republic. So we need to be bold enough to say this is good for us. It may have some difficulties. We need to discuss it, but these countries have made a choice. They are creating a certain path for themselves. It may not fit into the normal conceptions of Western forms of governance. But who says those forms of governance are what we should follow?
His closeness to Russia has been brought up by the US officials a few times. And some are even claiming that the Russian forces are propping him up for a stake in Burkina Faso's gold industry. Should that worry us? Because, the narrative has been that Russia has been backing illicit groups within the West African region for some time. And the way Russia is portrayed by the West, is it an issue that is should be of concern to us here at all in terms of his closeness to Russia?
Absolutely not. Let's not forget that Russia's previous incarnation as USSR has been present on this continent for decades, stood beside our liberation fighters to help us to gain independence. And particularly for Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger, Burkina Faso's request to Russia has been very specific in terms of particular security guarantees, but also in the provision of agricultural incentives that is leading to an expansion in Burkina Faso's wheat production. But France has been in Burkina Faso for over 100 years. And until Traoré kicked them out in 2023, was still one of the poorest countries. So if issues of sovereignty gives states the right to make choices for themselves, then I don't think it's up to any other country to come and talk. Now, all those who are criticizing Burkina Faso for dealing with Russia, Russia has invaded Ukraine. All those countries who are talking are still doing business with Russia. They talk about sanctions, sanctions, sanctions. But go to Moscow, go to the big cities. Western firms are finding ways and means of beating the sanctions to sell their luxury goods. So it's once more a struggle and a contestation about how the information is packaged and given out to people. Eventually, they'll come to China. They'll go to Brazil too and say that, why are you dealing with Brazil? Why are you dealing with China? I think it's up to the leadership of Burkina Faso to determine who are their best friends. And I can assure you, it is not just the external partners. Our own former president, Danado, went to the State Department, if you remember, and spoke about how the Africa Corps, the previous Wagner group, had been giving gold in exchange for security. But we couldn't prove it. So we had to go to Burkina Faso to eat humble pie. Okay, so we should be careful about how the knowledge that is generated and used or misused. A lot of people haven't gone to Burkina Faso. Okay, it is possible to travel from Accra to either Hamle or Paga, go through Po, and then go to Ouagadougou. Occasionally, there may be some. We see it ourselves here from Pusiga to Wale through Boko and all those things. Okay, so I am not worried about all these noises coming from people.
Let's talk about Ghana and our relationship with him. He was at Mahama's inauguration. He got a loud cheer. And I recall, I think you made some comments about that in an interview previously. Then over the weekend, he honored Sankara and Rawlings. So clearly, there's a certain respect for Rawlings in the country. I'm also told that Ghana is the only non-AES country in Africa he's visited. So that suggests something, right? And of course, Mahama has appointed Bevlolate to be like a diplomat for the AES. So how do you see the way he sees Ghana and how Mr. Mahama is also sort of warming up to him? Is that promising, or is that, how should Ghana approach this?
No, I think it's very promising. And once more, history is important. President Mahama has been extremely smart and savvy in tapping into Ghana's history with Burkina Faso. Let's not forget that it was Mr. Rawlings who plugged a young Mr. Mahama and gave him, his political space and a chance to start to grow. So he's leveraged on that romanticism of his relations with Mr. Rawlings. And if you see the delegation that went, Zanato was part of the delegation. Bevlolate, his special envoy to the Alliance of Sahel States, Totobi Kwache was there. Commodore, not Obimpe, the other one was also there. So the composition of the team was not made up of bootlicking party hacks. Okay, Mahama and his foreign policy team understand how to use the history emotions or emotional intelligence, okay, to show appreciation and to send a signal that we understand you. That when Nana attempted to sell you to the Americans, we are not of that ilk. So President Mahama has embellished his own Pan-Africanist stature. Let's not forget, even as former President Mahama, he was the head of the Tanda Forum, in which Pan-Africanist scholars, politicians, businessmen once a year met in Ethiopia to discuss where this continent wanted to go to. Foreign policy is not about empty rhetorical flourishes.
Okay.
It's about sensible, mature, informed, hands-on, identification of entry points that allows even your previous enemies to say, I can do business with you. And that is what in Burkina Faso.
My final question, Prof, is he chose two men to honor this weekend, Rawlings and Sankara, who represent very interesting, I believe, outcomes. Sankara comes into power in 83 and is assassinated 4 years later. Rawlings comes in 79, returns in 81, and becomes a Democrat who many credit for the solidity of our democracy. So in a sense, Rawlings represents longevity and transformation. Sankara represents a strong idea who was taken out very early. It looks like those are the two options available to this man, right? Because he already has said there have been attempts to remove him from office. And from the way he's going, I'm not asking you to predict, but it seems as if those two outcomes are the two possibilities, right? Where he does a good job and then eventually sort of democratizes the country, gives it a foundation for a solid transition, or he comes up with a strong idea, gives people hope, but is taken out, but the idea doesn't die. Where do you think which one do you think he would tilt towards?
No, I think he's a young man who has learned from history, and I think he's going to survive and to deepen the processes that he has started. Let me just share with your viewers, something that I find very useful. He's just started a resilience program against food and nutrition insecurity in the Sahel. Okay, that is transforming agriculture and is transforming lives. Okay, we are seeing road building, projects that in other countries, people would have stolen the money. So it's not only about the rhetoric, it's about practical, hands-on, operational interventions. So he knows, one, that the rapid expansion and sudden capacity of the terrorists is because they are getting external intelligence and logistical support. So he is very careful. He's also learning from the Rawlings experience. That you remember when Mr. Rawlings dismantled the CIA operation to destroy him and to ensure that Ghanaian women got cheap contraceptives that were dangerous to their health. They wanted to take Mr. Rawlings out. It was Michael Susudis and co who formed that dangerous attempt against Mr. Rawlings. I think there were 19 attempts against Mr. Rawlings' life. So this man will learn from his history. Okay? But irrespective of how much history we learn, it is for other people around him to say, we want to lay down our lives, both to protect the propagator of the ideas, but also the ideas itself. He knows he's got powerful enemies. And my final point, for the head of Africa to claim that, that is General Michael Langley, has accused Traoré of using the country's gold reserves, quote, to protect the junta regime rather than for the benefit of his people. There is no bigger falsehood than this. The regime must survive first to be able to drive the change that the people need. And I think from what is happening around the world, I think the United States is the last country.
Prof, I'll leave you to go back to it. Thank you so much for your insights, as ever. Professor Kwesi, head of the Office for International Cooperation, Kofi Annan Institute for Peacekeeping Training here in Accra, Ghana. When we come back, we'll be speaking to one of the leaders of an organization that's not just supporting the idea that this president has, but also organizing a protest march in Accra to solidarize with the president of Burkina Faso. Stay with us.